And now, please welcome our moderator.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're continuing a discussion from the end of 2019 at the Global Conference, where we were discussing the Sustainable Development Goals, and then a series of workshops and labs that we've had since then, and other webinars that we've had at the Milken Institute. We knew by the end of 2019 we were already seriously off track in meeting the SDG goals that were agreed to by 194 nations in 2015 by the UN agreement in Addis Ababa. The ability, where we are now is, and what we have to ask ourselves now is, where are we in this long arc of financial history? And why is impact investment the next chapter? We won't weigh you down if we go to slide 1 here first, over the last 3,000 years of financial history, but we want to zoom in on the century that we're in right now, from 1950 to 2030 to 50. And it's worth a quick review of the steady progress that we've made towards financing ideas and technology that liberate human and social capital as the defining resources that drive how we finance the future through the democratization of capital to empower ideas, to drive technology and productivity, to increase wealth, income, and job creation. We know there are massive gaps in the mobilization of capital allocation to meet these goals. And as you can see, we moved from the early equity markets after World War II to interest rate derivatives, to mortgage and asset securitization and corporate bonds, venture capital and private equity, to now moving into the area of impact investment, where all these things come together to influence and impact risk and returns and the outcomes for society as a whole. We have a heightened sense of urgency today about this, to accelerate the sustainable investment rate and the growth in order to keep it alive, so that we can end this decade far better than we started in 2020. We can still make this a roaring decade of comeback that this century requires. We know that overseas development assistance flatline of $150 billion is the gaps needed for SDGs that hover around $2.5 billion annually. But COVID really did throw a spotlight in sharp relief, has been discussed at this conference. In 2020, we had 71 million people pushed back into extreme poverty, the first rise in over 20 years. Half of the global workforce has experienced a 60% decline in income. Maternal deaths have increased. Childhood deaths have increased about below the age of 5 years old. We know the litany of painful problems that have been faced because of this dual health and economic crisis that broke out. Paradoxically, on the other hand, we've got a low interest rate environment with negative yields growing in fixed income markets, and the opportunity to carve new channels of capital into new markets with huge long-term growth potential that has never been greater. There's been enormous progress in innovative capital structures and in business models for deployment, and we have wind to our backs with the growing public and private interest now about the structural demand for capital, around $226 to $32 trillion by different estimates in impact and sustainable investments. So what can we do and discuss in this conversation today to bridge the financing gaps, to move the needle, to meet the moment, as this conference is all about? How can we break through the bottlenecks of pre-development cost and risk mitigation to a pipeline of investable projects that will restore and sustain aggregate demand by providing higher yields and higher rates of growth that are shared more equally to build a resilient, regenerative, and sustainable global economy? How do we build a higher yield in productivity, returns, and impact for the 21st century investors, and through innovative finance to fund long-term liabilities? Now, I'd want to introduce Sir Ronald Cohen to join us at this point in the conversation. With the leverage power of impact investment, we really are at a place right now, as Professor Lawrence Summers, and former Treasury Secretary, argued, is really the ground zero of this very big deal. That's fueled by the triple helix, as it's been called, between risk, reward, and impact. Everybody, Ronnie, in your terrific new book that has just come out in the UK, it's on the bestseller list, and it's being released this month as well in the United States. Everybody from Bono to Pope Francis has recognized the importance of your book and our conversation here today. Ronnie, our audience includes a number of people who are active in business as financial practitioners or new entrants into this market, or students of the corporate finance revolution of the 1970s and 80s, when you and others started your long career. You've been one of the pioneers in private equity and venture capital, and you dedicated the most recent chapter of your career to translating these financial technologies to impact investment. what are the lessons that were learned from the corporate finance revolution that are translated into the impact revolution? And with this, I just want to raise up slide 4 for a moment before we go into your answers to this question. But as we go to slide 4, I found in this book, because it's a topic we want to go into a deeper dive today, that everyone can read here on the screen with the rate of which we have to increase crop production between now and 2050 as we go from 7.5 billion to closer to 10 billion people on the planet. How can we engineer ways to monetize positive externalities and avoid the negative ones for impact investors to tap into the large pools of capital that are seeking impact?
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you and to participate in this panel with you, Glenn, with Alex, Bhaskar, and Eugene. When I kicked off in the investment business at the age of 26 in 1972 to co-found what became Apex Partners, a typical investment portfolio held two securities: the stocks of the country and the bonds of the country of the investor. And then we began to measure risk. Funnily enough, it's the same university that brought us Milton Friedman, that brought us risk measurement. Risk measurement brought some important new concepts that transformed our portfolios. It brought the concept of risk-adjusted return and the concept of diversification. They opened the door to multi-asset class portfolios, such as those that we know today. And they opened the door to venture capital, which funded the tech revolution, and to investment in emerging markets, which funded globalization. And then we had the tech revolution. And the tech revolution brought another rotation of our portfolios. Companies which didn't believe in tech were left behind. They were overtaken by companies which were only 20 years old and became the largest companies in their countries. And now we're on the threshold of a similar change, Glenn. We're on the threshold of an impact revolution. Why do I say that? Well, the first thing is all of us have noticed that this revolution is already taking place in the financial markets. We have more than $30 trillion of ESG investing aiming to achieve environmental, social, and governance impact, as well as profit. Impact investment proper, where you measure the impact that is created, will hit $1 trillion this year. Now, when we wrote the GA Task Force report 6 years ago, we had a chapter entitled The First $1 Trillion. It would have been fanciful to think that it could happen in just 6 years. $1 trillion is the size of the global venture capital pool. And so we have more than a third of all professionally managed money in the world going to achieve impact. But we have no transparency on the impact that is being created. And that's why technology is bringing a massive breakthrough now to this big issue. Over the last few decades, we've had organizations measuring the impact in tons of carbon emissions and liters of water and so on, which have given us the foundations now for being able to translate these metrics into financial numbers that can be reflected in a profit and loss account and in a balance sheet. And that's what the Harvard Business School Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative, which I'm proud to chair, has been working on. And just a few weeks ago, it published for the first time the environmental impact in dollar terms of 1,800 companies. And when you look at these numbers, Glenn, you realize just how little we know about the impact of companies. 250 of these companies, 15% of the 1,800, actually create more environmental damage than they make in profit. A full third create 25% or more environmental damage. as a percentage of their profits. And so we begin to understand that we can measure the environmental impact of companies, but if you go to the Harvard Business School IWA site, the impact weighted account site, you will see that we're also measuring employment impact, diversity, the cost of a lack of diversity. You can look at a company like Intel, and you can see that its lack of diversity relative to the demographics around its facilities, the differences it has in gender pay and benefits and other differences, reduce the positive employment impact of a $7 billion wage bill that it pays its employees every year by half. And so we have published now the impact of a handful of companies, but soon we will publish hundreds of companies' employment impact. And shortly after, in the next few months, we will also publish the product impact of companies, showing what different companies' products achieve in terms of improvement or damage to our health, to our lives, and our environment. Now, why is this such an important revolution? It's an important revolution because we can already see in the Harvard data a correlation between companies in the same sector that pollute more and lower valuations. So the ESG money has already tilted the scales in favor of companies that deliver social and environmental improvement, or at any rate, in many cases, less damage than their competitors. And that is actually going to redefine the meaning of profit and the value and of success in business, and move the goalposts for business. Now, what does that imply for our portfolios and for achievement of the SDGs? Our portfolios are already rotating away from companies that are net impact negative to companies that are less impact negative or impact positive. And we're beginning to discover that optimizing risk return impact delivers better financial returns than optimizing risk return. So the original received wisdom that if you do good and do well at the same time, you're going to do less well, you're going to make less money, is actually being proven to be a myth. And if you look at companies like Tesla, where Elon Musk didn't enter the automobile industry with a traditional automobile, thinking that there was a major opportunity in such an old established industry, but wanted to disrupt the model of the automobile industry and shift it away from the combustion engine, which he has succeeded in doing, achieved an increase in the valuation of his company that's overtaken the valuation of General Motors. So when you optimize risk return impact, you improve the risk part of your equation. You also open the door to new markets and new product opportunities. The implication for the SDGs is huge, because we lack $30 trillion today to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Well, there's 30 trillion of ESG money flowing already. Imagine the impact that would be created if these companies, instead of creating massive environmental and social problems that governments tax us in order to try to remedy them, if these companies actually began to bring solutions to the big problems we faced. If governments began to use this impact transparency to tax companies more fairly, to tax the companies that are creating the harm, instead of taxing everyone to remedy the harm created by a few, and to provide incentives for companies to bring solutions, to create business models that actually deliver both impact and profit at the same time. I think we're going to see entrepreneurship shift in that direction. 30% of private equity firms have already signed up to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. And you can see the values of young people in terms of their consumption, in terms of their employment, and in terms of their investment preferences, all going in this direction. It will happen out of necessity, and it's inevitable that it will happen, Glenn, because it's price-sensitive information. And if impact is price-sensitive information, governments are going to have to do what they did in 1933 with gap accounting and auditors. They're going to have to mandate that every company publishes impact-weighted accounts based on generally accepted impact principles and auditors.
It's a very compelling argument, Ronnie. And let's move over quickly to Eugene. My colleague, Professor Eugene Kendall, is one of our leading financial economists. He's the former chair of the National Economic Council here in Israel for 7 years and led an array of financial reforms and policies that have driven technology growth here. He now heads up Startup Nation Central. And we've been working on something we want to take for a test ride here today in the thought and action leadership that this group has been working on in the area of impact. Let's just briefly run the slide 3 to introduce this discussion of how we might apply these principles to the case of smallholder agriculture.
In 2020, close to 1 billion people around the world do not have enough food to sustain themselves.
In 2020, we already know that it will take more than rain and sunlight to meet the target of up to 70% increase in crop production required to feed the world by 2050.
It will take technology, dedicated local agripreneurs, and financial innovation. Join the Evergreen Impact Accelerator to become a partner in a global vision.
So, Eugene, you and Bhaskar have recognized in your work the disconnect between technology and the technological gains and market's ability to distribute solutions to the farming sectors. How do we get technologies into the hand of this 85% of the ag market that's represented by smallholder farmers?
Thank you, Glenn. Very happy to be here. I would really like to focus, like you said, on the very, very specific challenge: how to dramatically increase the productivity of almost 400 million smallholder farms in emerging markets. This is, by the way, the food security challenge, the sustainability challenge, and the poverty alleviation challenge all moving at once. But we also see, similar to what Sir Ronald said, as a substantial business and investment opportunity. Can I please call slide 8? So, in the last 100 years, if you look at the disappearance of small farms in Western economies, basically this happened because they gave way to much larger industrial farms. Can I have slide 8, please? And so basically they were bought by larger and larger farmers, and those farmers optimized their productivity and utilized all the novel technology that was available. This is not, but in the process of that, hundreds of millions of people were displaced from their land and had to leave or had to become workers for hire. This is no longer an option in emerging markets today. And so if the size of the farm cannot adapt to technology, the technology has to adapt to the size of the farm. Not only technology, but also the business model of how this technology gets there. Luckily, we are living in an age where such technologies are available and becoming more and more available every day. So the question is, how can we bring the technology to the small farmer? In order to do that, we have to create an ecosystem that jointly solves 3 problems. One of them is access to farmers. Well, instead of talking to one farmer that has 1,000 hectares, you need to work with 2,000 farmers who have each half a hectare or maybe 1 hectare. This implies that you have to access these farmers. You have to gain their trust so they will actually believe you. You have to, with knowledge, give them knowledge to understand what is it that you're offering. You have to give them ability to deploy. The farmers that are making $300-400 a year have very, very limited ability to access credit and to deploy technology. But first of all, you have to understand their needs. So access to farmers is an incredibly important part, and Bhaskar will talk more about this. The next thing is once we understand their needs, we have to identify the right technologies at the right price points that are available that can address these needs, test them, adapt them to the local conditions, as well as adapt the business model so they can actually work. Now, this is something that we had for over the last 2 years. We had a lot of experience working on that with the Syngenta Foundation, going through the process of identifying the needs and then bringing a technology. But all of that is not going to happen unless you have a continuum of innovative financing solutions that assure predictability in the flow of funds. Today, the ecosystem of finance that addresses this question is disjoint and ineffective in allowing scale. There is some philanthropy, some impact, some DFI, some VCs, but there's no continuity and there's no single point which brings significant deal flow to large scale. So addressing these three problems individually turned out not to be a sustainable solution. It has to be done in a coordinated way and on a large scale to reach sustainability in a sense of that it becomes profitable to do that. So the three nonprofit organizations with the relevant expertise joined in this endeavor. So Syngenta Foundation is an expert in access to farmers in bringing basic technologies through that access. They have a very, very interesting and successful model in that. In the last 2 years, we joined them. Startup Nation Central has an expertise over the last 6-7 years of identifying technologies that address the specific needs of corporates, governments, and NGOs around the world. We worked and we now have an operational experience in identifying, adapting, and adopting technology through this network. And recently we were joined by Milken Innovation Center, who are experts in innovative finance. Now, while nonprofits, all of us understand that relying on philanthropy cannot bring scalability. We must create an integrated solution platform that after some investment becomes self-sustaining and scalable. We believe that we actually have designed such a platform, and I think Bhaskar can start explaining how it works.
Let's go over to you, Bhaskar. Tremendous experience you've had in the Syngenta Sustainability Foundation in India. And you've been piloting these ideas to lead to a model that would increase adoption of relevant technologies and scaling them to a sustainable system to adopt and test and identify for social and environmental impact. Now, why is that despite having access to the best technologies in agriculture, there's still a missing link between small farmers who do so much of the production and sustainable technologies? What can we do in terms of this last mile of delivery? And can you explain that model to us?
Yeah, thank you very much, Glenn. It's a pleasure being on the panel with you, Sir Ronald, Eugene, and Alex. Before just jumping onto the challenges that we face in translating the technologies from lab to land, I just like to remind everyone that by solving the challenges in agriculture, it has a positive ramifications on at least 11 to 12 SDG goals. I mean, that's a significant play of agriculture and increasing the smallholder farmers' income has. Now, coming to why we're facing the challenges of transferring the technologies from lab to land, it's no denying that there's been a major transformation in agriculture sector in the last few decades, and the technologies that are available today can double and triple the yields in Africa and Asian countries. The missing link has been what we call as the last mile delivery from the technology provider's point of view, or a first mile access from a farmer point of view. Let me explain this in detail. There are five aspects to it. If there is a fantastic technology, say from Israel or any other country, or for that matter within India itself, which can double the yield, how does it actually reach out to the smallholder farmer? First, she must have access to the information about the technology. This still is a relatively an easy job given the penetration of mobile technologies and so on. Then the challenge comes about the availability of the technology in the proximity of her village. That's the second point. Third, she then needs to have access to finance to buy the technology. Fourth, she needs to know a know-how of the technology to deploy it in a right manner, the right application. And finally, the end result of deploying technology has to result in increase in the income of the smallholder farmer. Otherwise, there is no incentive for the smallholder farmer to adopt the technology. And that's where I think closing the loop, market linkages play a critical role. I think bringing all these five elements together in tandem and delivering seamlessly, I think is the big challenge. And that's the reason why we've been facing this problem of technologies not reaching out to smallholder farmers. To solve this puzzle of last mile delivery and distribution, Syngenta Foundation has been working on the concept of village-based agents or agri-entrepreneurs for the last 6 years. The concept is simple yet powerful in terms of solving the challenge. We look for unemployed youth in the villages and train them to become agri-entrepreneurs. And each of those agri-entrepreneurs engages about 150 to 200 farmers and provide a set of agriculture services like uh, supplying inputs, market linkages, farm machinery, access to credit, and so on, insurance, so on. It's a self-reinforcing and a hyper-local model. This means that the entrepreneur can only succeed if she or he is providing a delta to smallholder farmers and increasing their income. Likewise, farmers can succeed if they engage with the agri-entrepreneur in the village and are able to avail quality services. So that's how it is in a mutually dependent model. And we started off with about 27 entrepreneurs in 2014, and today we have close to 3,500 entrepreneurs spread across 15 states in India, engaging with about 350,000 farmers. And 15% of these entrepreneurs are women entrepreneurs, and we are very keen to increase this ratio at least 30 to 35% in the next 2 years, and eventually taking it to 50%. We partnered with Tata Trust and IDH Netherlands to create a new foundation dedicated for scaling up this initiative. Uh, so that's where we are, and it's called Agri Entrepreneur Growth Foundation, and it has an ambitious goal to set up 100,000 entrepreneurs and directly engage with 15 to 20 million farmers. The key here is again partnerships. We need to bring in an ecosystem of partners to right from the state governments, input companies, market off-takers, banks, and financial institutions, and so on, to make this in a model successful. It's not about one organization or two planting a flag there and saying, we want to bring this change. So it's about creating that partner ecosystem. The model is it looks simple, like I said in the beginning. Then why doesn't it exist before we did this, or it's been happening in different forms and shapes. But I think it's financially unviable for any single company or a technology to set up this dedicated last mile networks in 100,000, 200,000 villages in India or in Africa. And that's where, if a group of companies can deliver through a single entrepreneur, the cost of delivering technologies will significantly go down. In other words, the customer acquisition cost for companies will be much lower.
So let me ask you a question here, just to intervene. Let's pull up slide number 11 first, just to look at how this worked out in one specific example of a technology that you've been working with.
Yeah, so what we do, Glenn, is that we start off with providing basic services like inputs, crop advisory, market linkages to farmers, and provide the delta to them in increasing the farm income. And the entrepreneur gains the trust of the farmer. And then we switch gears in terms of providing them the new technologies which are little more advanced and which are little higher capex. And to do that, what we do as a foundation is we test the new technologies which we think are relevant to the local agronomic conditions, and we put them through a platform that we have called GATE. It's a global agriculture technology evaluation platform. And the technology that you're seeing on the screen is a simple technology called mycorrhiza, which is developed by a company in Israel called Groundworks Bioag. And we tested this in 5 states in India on variety of crops that you can see there. And we see that the yield increase has been in the range of 10 to 25%, which is a significant increase in the yield in several crops. And the return on investment there is phenomenal. Farmer investing something like $10 ends up making $40 to $50 additional income because of this one technology. So that's how we take the technologies to the farmers. We test them, and also the entrepreneurs establishes a small demo farm in the villages, so that the farmers can actually come and see the technology, and seeing is believing, so that the rate of adoption of the technology gets accelerated. And can you pull up the slide number 12?
Can you?
Yeah, yeah. So you can see the positive impact of one technology on SDGs. It's increased transplanting success, drought resistance, which has a direct implication on the climate change SDG. Increases carbon sequestration, increases organic matter in the soil, improves the water retention in the soil. There's also, obviously 10 to 25% yield increase, which I mentioned earlier, and reduction in fertilizer use, and reduction in water use, and about 3 to 5x returns on the technology. So,
remarkable outcomes here that are monetizable in the way you're approaching this.
Yeah, Glenn. But I think the key thing is like what Eugene mentioned earlier. It's not about doing a successful pilot with one technology or two technologies in a very unstructured manner. It's about bringing everything together in a much more structured manner. How can we take tens of technologies and at the same time create a network of thousands of, if not millions of entrepreneurs across Africa and Asia, and you have technologies, you have distribution platforms, and then you then bundle in finance, and that's where the magic happens, and that's how I think.
So let's dive into that, because we've got climate smart agriculture on the table, as well as increasing yields and incomes, and sort of the depth and breadth of impact that we're going to talk a little bit more with Alex about. But Eugene, just for one last comment to you about how can we scale this model up? How do we have a process of continuous technological innovation and deployment in order to accelerate, to be the technology part of the accelerator to the SDG achievements?
So we have evaluated many initiatives of the last mile access, but found agripreneur model to be very, very different, with the right incentives, not extractive, and is scalable. And so for us, it was we were very happy that Syngenta Foundation agreed to work with us. And we understood that scalability of anything requires that stakeholders make profit. So from the beginning, we decided that we have to make sure that all the stakeholders that invest their efforts, whether these are companies or investors, have to be making profits, and the platforms that we operate have to cover their costs. There's a lot of value, very large value, that can come out of this combination of technology and the agripreneur through this network. However, what we understood through the last 2 years, that if you increase the number of agripreneurs, or you increase the reach to the market without increasing the number of technologies, you cannot make it sustainable. If you increase the number of technologies without increasing the scale of the market, you cannot make this sustainable. There is a complementarity between these two streams of investments, and if you don't make them simultaneously, you cannot succeed, because there's what's called in economics externalities. If I invest in the number of agripreneurs, each technology becomes more valuable. And if I increase the number of technologies, each agripreneur with additional 100 to 200 farmers become more valuable. So what we need to do is to increase simultaneously those two. If
So
we
let's
do
look
it
at
in a
slide 9. If I can ask Eugene for us to pull up slide 9
yeah,
for a
sorry,
moment.
pull up slide 9. Sorry, thank you, Glenn. I forgot. If we do that in a coordinated way, so if we have financing available to do this in a coordinated way, we create two streams of investment. One stream through the AEG Foundation of bringing more agripreneurs and more access to farmers, and another one of what we call Evergreen Impact Accelerator, which is focusing on identifying technologies that are relevant for these farmers, figuring out how to adapt them to the environment in which these farmers operate, as well as come up with a business model that allows these farmers to adopt them. We can do it, and we link the two processes together financially and legally so that each one takes into account the value that it creates for the other one. We can do it much, much more efficiently with much lower investment. Actually, according to our calculation, if we take a single region or a country, we can reach a minimal scale at about 15 to 20 commercialized technologies and about 25 to 30,000 agripreneurs. What it means is that once you've invested to reach that scale, from there on, any additional agripreneur is financing itself, financing all its training and deployment, and every additional technology is beneficial, so you don't need to subsidize it. So once you've reached that scale, you can then leave this system to operate itself, and then you can go and establish another system in another country. We've already started exploring, after success in India, we've already started exploring the same thing with Syngenta Foundation in Africa. What remains to small thing
Can we
that
just go back to the slide for a minute, Eugene, because there's one last aspect of this, if they could just raise that.
That's
Combination
exactly
of both
the point.
financial return and social and environmental returns back to the system.
Thank you, Glenn. So what remains is to finance the milestone. I mean, the challenge in the financing part is that big part of the returns are coming through social and environmental returns rather than financial returns. So the people who are investing in technologies are getting their financial return at market rates. People who are investing in it for a social and environmental return are getting those. And this system, after a while, becomes self-sustaining. The problem is, at the beginning, we need to create sufficient blended finance to overcome the initial risk aversion of some of the market investors. Once we've done that, the system is basically self-financing. So we believe that both the philanthropic community, the impact investors, the DFIs, as well as the market rate VCs can find their place in this system, and we would love to explore this in more detail with experts.
Great, and that's what we're going to do on November 19th. To folks that are here on this call, if you're interested, we'll be having a financial innovation lab on this subject and trying to refine and come up with the solution sets for this. I want to turn it over to Alex Swain at this point. Alex was with us last year at a 2-hour workshop session we had after our SDG panel in the 2019 Global Conference. And I learned so much from her, and then her colleague Ken Chomitz joined us here in Israel as we've been trying to sort through a development finance institution here. Alex, you bring the perspective of an impact investor that in your career has been deeply rooted in analytics and practice in development economics and finance. The fund you manage is focused on catalyzing the growth of innovations that can scale with massive impact. And your investment process is quite rigorous and acts very much like a de-risking machine. You and your team have been very effective pioneers in developing a practical impact framework. Could you discuss this de-risking machine works? And I also want to ask you, just to get my questions in all at once, how do we bridge these early stages of project and early stages of new market development in frontier economies? And more recently, you've done a really deep dive into one of the critical areas of the Sustainable Development Goals of dealing with the price of inequality and how it endangers our ability to build towards economic recovery by quantifying gender inequality as part of practical impact. If you could address all these questions in the next 10 minutes, and we can have further discussion with our team here as well. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Oops.
Glenn, you've been quite clever of setting this up as sort of a bridge between the new strategic framework to redefine the meaning of profit for publicly traded companies and privately held ones that Sir Ronald Cohen discussed at the outset of our session. And then we've gotten really down onto the ground and heard about entrepreneurs who need capital that can tolerate risk and be patient while new business models are proven out. I hope I can describe a little bit about how we're thinking about our role in that larger ecosystem and some of our latest thinking about this transparency on impact being created. Just a few sentences about the Global Innovation Fund. We're a multilateral investment vehicle that was established for precisely that mission, to invest patient capital in innovative solutions that improve the lives of poor people in developing countries. We're backed by governments with the mission to use both grant making and debt and equity in the pursuit of scaling development impact. At the beginning of this year, we deployed about $90 million in a portfolio on track to improve the lives of more than 90 million people by the year of 2030. And in order to measure impact of our portfolio, we use a metric that we call person years of income generated to capture both the breadth of impact as well as the depth of benefits experienced every year, expressed in dollar terms. The GIF portfolio is expected to generate some 6 million person years of income annually. As you noted at the outset, Glenn, this has been a very difficult year, particularly in developing countries. 25 years of progress in lifting people out of poverty has been wiped out since COVID emerged. We can't afford another 25 years to get back the gains that we lost this year. And innovation is going to be really critical in recovering lost progress and achieving our global goals. We heard about $1 trillion in impact investing being deployed right now, but that's not sufficient money to achieve this SDGs. Getting more capital to back innovations for development is going to require advances by our community, meaning those of us who think about the impact part of impact investing, in 3 important ways. How we measure impact, how we structure investments to manage risk and tolerate risk, as Eugene was just talking about, and how we combine and justify the combination of that financially concessional money and more commercial capital in blended transactions. I'm going to start with just a very quick example of a GIF investment that helps think about each of these challenges of getting capital off of the sidelines and into the game in turn. We met a Ugandan company called SafeBoda in 2015 when they were working to take the idea of a safer, more professional motorbike taxi service to scale. Motorcycle taxis are common, but pretty dangerous in Uganda. And SafeBoda offered drivers training, provided helmets, and introduced a app for hailing their drivers. In 2016, GIF provided an early seed round of debt financing to SafeBoda while they proved out their model. And we exited from the investment successfully in 2018 when SafeBoda raised an oversubscribed equity round with traditional commercial capital. Why was GIF willing to invest in SafeBoda before other more traditional capital was able to? It's a little bit precisely because we do think about profit differently. Our mandate is to invest in pursuit of social impact first. And by measuring these benefits rigorously, we explicitly place a value on this impact and therefore price our investment differently from commercial investors. this whole session is about. We've all, of course, been talking about measuring impact in our sector for a long time. But many of our current approaches have not always gone far enough because they don't help us to prioritize and positively screen on impact and to compare apples and oranges in a diverse portfolio. One metric that many impact investors use, for instance, is lives touched or jobs created. This is appealing, but it's got several challenges. Are these productive jobs? Is that the full source of impact? Intuitively, you'd invest in SafeBoda because of the health benefits for drivers and riders. Can we measure that? We recently estimated that since the inception of SafeBoda's innovation, 200 deaths due to motorcycle accidents have been prevented. And between 2016 and 2020, SafeBoda generated $9 million in discounted net social benefits, with innovation returning over $7 for every dollar invested by GIF. But as many of us know here, however, and I'm sure you've been struggling with in the work on impact-weighted accounts at Harvard Business School, those kind of social return on investment calculations can be very difficult to do with early-stage investments. For sure, when we made our investment in SafeBoda in 2016, we could not have done that full calculation. We couldn't model a flow of costs as these were being discovered, in particular, even if we could have estimated a flow of benefits. But that's not a reason to just go back to counting customers or jobs created. In fact, when you're investing in innovation, I actually think that this complete social return on investment is not fit for purpose, because the vast majority of benefits begin to flow in the medium to long run. This would be true for the agripreneurs that we were hearing about from Syngenta and Eugene as well. And because the investor is actually supporting experimentation and discovery just as much as service delivery. So we should assess impact returns with careful rigor. But let's be realistic about what can be estimated when. As you alluded to, Glenn, at GIF, we forecast potential impact 10 years ahead for every investment because it takes that long for truly impactful innovations to widely diffuse. And we estimate the probabilities that our innovations will successfully reach that scale. We develop a universal metric of impact denominated in dollars, just as we were talking about in the beginning of our session, by multiplying depth of impact times its breadth, times that probability of success. So for SafeBoda, in 2016, we estimated the number of riders that they might have in 10 years of successful, how many injuries and deaths could be averted with helmets, translated that into dollar terms using epidemiological models, and multiplied that by a probability that SafeBoda could figure out their business model and take off. So even without the data needed to do a full social return on investment calculation, with this year 10 snapshot, we're able to use impact as a positive screening tool across sectors, and a means for our own backers to hold us accountable for the value for money of our work. Now, we did hear about this overlap of this triple helix of risk and reward and impact. And I will say, give you a little bit of my take on this risk question. We are facing a period of time in which we're going to have to challenge ourselves anew to take and tolerate smart risk if we're to achieve the SDGs. Traditional capital doesn't price social benefits when making investment decisions. As impact investors, of course, we take these social benefits into account. These added benefits should help us to tolerate additional risk. But sometimes, as Eugene, as you said, sometimes our community is excessively risk averse. I think that to back innovation, we need to use the lens of R&D decision making, as well as investing. A business developing a new product makes budget allocation decisions in a stage-gated, piecemeal fashion. In the early days, when the probability that an idea will translate into a successful prototype is low, and the likelihood it will make a full-grown product at scale is even smaller, then budgets are small and really pretty tightly tied to milestones. But if a prototype can be developed, budgets get bigger, because you can update your estimate of the probability of ultimate success. No prototype, no further investment, you cut your losses. We're trying to up our game at GIF to make more explicit the implicit bets we're taking and to calibrate our level of exposure to an innovation based on our best current understanding of these successive probabilities of success, as well as financial metrics. And lastly, we talked already a little bit before about blending different kinds of capital together. And I do think for us as impact investors, crowding in other capital and or additionality in the jargon is really key to our value proposition. So just as we want to measure impact to attach a value to it, I think, and I'd love to talk more about this, our next frontier will be to advance how we measure additionality so that we can value that too. This, I think, is a pretty tricky challenge. There's a mechanistic approach to this from which we can begin based on the share of investment different funders have. So if GIF was 50% of the capital Safe Boda had ever received in 2016 when we came in, then maybe we can claim 50% of the flow of benefits to GIF. But that approach has some real limitations when funding innovation. It rewards taking a large early stake in a company. So it kind of runs counter to thinking with our R&D lens. It works against the good investment practice of sharing risk with like-minded investors and in supporting firms to diversify their backers. And of course, additionality comes in support not measured in dollars, as all active investors know. So the more we've worked on this question of measuring impact at GIF, really, the more I've learned about all the questions we still need to grapple with. I'm excited to see ideas like these innovative financing vehicles that we've heard about here today and innovative ways of thinking at the biggest level about how we internalize externalities in redefining profit. And we're happy, and we look forward to being part of the conversation. We're excited about what we've learned so far, but all of us, we don't know all the answers.
Lots of your comments here today, Alex. Let's just go back to a quick round of questions that have come in here. Let's actually start with you, Alex, just on one additional item that I know has been one of the aspects of it. I mean, the issues of additionality, how it links back to the measurement of impact and how that conditions risk and the like. But could you just say a few words about a question that came in on what are the measures you use to address gender inequality and some cases of how these measures could be used to assess outcomes and be used in outcome-based financing? Oops, we lost sound.
In our estimate of benefits associated with innovations. Because sometimes we think it's not easy to translate those changes in structural inequalities into dollar terms. So I'll give you an example of we backed innovation that brings volunteer mothers to contribute on a weekly basis to preschool education in Ghana. And you can imagine how to model out the education gains for kids from this quite easily. You know, it takes some economics and some assumptions, but you can think about how to do that. But the women involved in this program at the volunteer level, they were also experiencing real gains in household bargaining power and in self-efficacy as a result of being involved in this program. Sometimes we might think that while those benefits are great, they're hard to monetize. But we've been working really closely with gender experts to be able to figure out some consistent rules of thumb to use to attach a monetizable benefit associated with gains in self-efficacy, so that when we value an investment like that, we're thinking not only about the education benefits that flow to the kids, but those benefits that flow to those women as well. This allows us to apply a consistent gender lens across all the investments that we consider.
This is really very helpful to see how you're working these problems through. Let me ask Eugene and Bhaskar, and then bring it back to Ronnie. Just how do you see the link between the development work in development economics to the classic tech acceleration program? And why do you feel the potential for scaling is now? If you could just be concise in your comments. We've just got 4 minutes left. Bhaskar and Eugene.
I think, yeah, Glenn, I think the time is right because the couple of major events shaping up. One, of course, is the digital tools and the penetration of digital tools across the globe, and second is the focus on youth agenda. And almost all the governments are looking at how they engage with youth, and how they can be part of this process of, especially around entrepreneurship. And third, the climate change is going to have a big impact. We need to gear ourselves for this. So I think, given these couple of factors, I think everybody, again, it's like all the companies and organizations coming together as partners and the partnership ecosystem to solve this big societal challenge.
Eugene, would you add anything?
Yeah, sure. I would add two more topics, both related to the development of venture that Sir Ronald was so influential on so early on. It took us about 40 years to develop a functioning, maybe even 50, functioning ecosystem which assures continuity of deal flow development from the pre-seed, seed, early stage, later stage, etc., until really scale to IPOs, etc. We don't need another 40 years to develop a similar system that assures continuity of financing in the areas of impact. I mean, there is value to be developed there, and this value only waits to be discovered and financed through the similar system. Also, that venture system developed a lot of new technologies that make smallholders accessible, because what today's technology allows, which was not allowed even 15 years ago through mobile technology as well as sensors and communications, is that you can coordinate at very low cost among very large numbers of small holders. And so those technologies...
that's the point of aggregation is there, Eugene. I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but we just have to move on.
Of course. Yeah.
One final word from Ronald in a question that was asked. Why do you think that there's this system of new accounting should happen now? What would be the pressure for that shift to impact? And I just very quickly, Ronnie, the urgency here really of creating this mobilization of a bridge to a future for the rest of this decade.
Right, so I totally agree with everything that's been said. 10, 15 years ago, you'd have been having this conversation and talking about philanthropy or aid. Today, you're talking of pay-for-success securities like development impact bonds. You're talking of social bonds. You're talking of impact venture capital. It's just a completely microfinance, completely different world. We have the tools now to be able to deliver measurable impact as well as market rates of return. Why are we...
I'm just afraid we're just going to run out of time. I just wanted to pull up slide 17 for a moment, just to invite you all to join us. If you could pull up slide 17. There. We'll be having a Financial Innovation Lab on November 19th. Do reach out to us to get more information about this as we try to build the toolkit broader and try to meet the goals that our excellent panelists have set for us today and the goals that we hope to achieve. Thank you all for joining us and compressing to this 1 hour, but we have so much more to talk about and so much more work to do. Thanks for joining us here in this effort.
Thank you very much. Bye.